In this weekly parsha, the weekly reading called Bo, we learn about the first mitzvot, the first commandments given to the Jewish nation. In the entire book of Bereshit, there were 3 commandments that were given, including circumcision. And they were given, of course, before our people became a nation. But in the first 2 parshiot of Sefer Shemot, the last 2 weekly readings, there were no commandments at all, just the stories of the Jewish people and the exile and the suffering and now the preparation for the Exodus. So in this parsha, in the 3rd parsha of the book of Shemot called Bo, we actually learn a lot of different commandments. And the first commandment given is the law of Jewish calendar. Literally, it says, "Hachodesh hazeh yelechem rosh chadashim." This month will be for you the first of the months. So, according to our sages, it includes both the commandments to set up the calendar, to decide based on what's called Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, when the Jewish months start, and that the first of the months that we always count is from Nisan. This idea, it's a very interesting idea that in Jewish, even language, even in today's modern Hebrew, there are no days of the week. There are just days counting from Shabbat. So, for instance, I work as a programmer, and we have a person from Japan, a Japanese person who is responsible for all the translations into various languages. So they have these tables with different languages and days of the week. And he asked me, why is it in Hebrew it's kind of weird? Because all it says is like a letter and then Shabbat, letter Shabbat. And of course, that's how the days are counted. First day of Shabbat, which is Sunday, the second day after Shabbat is Monday, etc. So there's Shabbat and all the days that we count from Shabbat, because Shabbat is the main day and all the other days don't have their own proper names. So the same way Ramban writes, used to be the months. If you look in the 5 books of Moshe, there are no names of the months. They're not called Nisan or Tishrei or whatever it is. Those months, as the Jerusalem Talmud tells us, came from Babel. After the Babylonian exile, we picked up the names of the months from the Babylonians. But the Torah only simply says the first month, the second month, the third month, etc. All the months are just counted from the month of Exodus, the month of our delivery, the month of our Geulah. So that's the command here that includes all of these aspects, that we how to set up the calendar, how to count the months, which month is considered the first. And of course, most of the laws of the Torah are dependent in some way or another on time and on the Jewish calendar. Obviously, all the holidays depend on the calendar. This is the crucial point. You can't have holidays without the calendar. That's why in our prayers, the Talmud tells us, we don't just say Mikadesh Hazmanim. The blessing doesn't end with blessed are you Hashem, who sanctifies holidays. When it's Shabbat, we just say Mikadesh Shabbat, because Shabbat doesn't depend on us. It's always the 7th day. But the holidays depend on the Jewish court, on the Beit Din, on the decisions of the rabbis when they accepted the testimony of witnesses who saw the new moon. Today the calendar is fixed, and it's been fixed for way more than 1,000 years. But it used to be that each time it was decided ad hoc, depending on when the witnesses seen a new moon, the testimony was accepted, and then that became the first day of the new month. And of course, another aspect of this is the fact that our calendar is lunar-solar. It depends on the moon, but it also depends on the sun. In a way, it's in between the Muslim calendar and the Christian calendar. The Muslim calendar is purely lunar. So that's why it's not a full year. 12 lunar months is less than a full solar year. And that's why Ramadan can fall, for instance, in the summer or sometimes in the winter, depending on which year it is. But the Jewish calendar has to keep the seasons more or less on time. As for instance, Pesach, the Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of Matzot, the Torah calls it the time of spring. And it tells us specifically to keep and make sure it's in the spring. Same way, the last set of holidays ending with Sukkot has to be the end of the season of gathering the crops. If we would have just 12 lunar months, then after a few years, the Pesach would end up first in the winter, then in the fall, and we go all year round, just like Ramadan does by Muslims. But of course, because of the Torah law that we have to keep the seasons, and at the same time, the months are according to the moon. The word Chodesh is from the word Chadash. Month comes from the fact that the moon is seen all over each month, new moon. So that's the idea that on the one hand, the months are all lunar months, and at the same time, we sometimes have years that have 12 lunar months and sometimes 13 lunar months. The Jewish leap year means that there are two others, so there are 13 months altogether. So that's why the holidays stay more or less in the right seasons. So if, for instance, Pesach seems to be falling too early, it will be too cold, the sages would decide to add an extra Adar and move everything by 1 month. So we would have 13 months the previous year, and Pesach, the first month of the next year, would be a month later. So that's why the Jewish holidays fall more or less in their seasons, but they don't fall exactly on the same solar date. So Pesach could fall in the end of March or beginning of April, somewhere around there. So it's a plus or minus practically within 4 weeks or so, each holiday can fall. That's why sometimes you have Hanukkah, like last year you saw Hanukkah was very late at the end of December, but sometimes Hanukkah falls around the American Thanksgiving holiday at the end of November. It could happen. So all of these holidays, they more or less can be within 1 month in terms of the solar calendar, but their dates are fixed in the lunar calendar. So this is the idea that Hashem told Moshe. This month will be the beginning for you of all the months, and according to the oral tradition, all these laws are given and explained in the Talmud. There is actually a very closely approximated to the nearest second or so, the period of the moon, the average period of the moon. And in general, our calendar is quite complex. It's a very beautiful thing for those who like astronomy and like calculations. It's really an interesting thing to learn, the details of the Jewish calendar, which of course goes, it's far beyond the topic that I'm addressing now. What I wanted to mention instead is this idea that the Jewish people are compared to the moon for a number of reasons. One of which being that the moon, as opposed to the sun, it's always different. Sometimes we don't see it at all, sometimes it's small, very thin, and then we could see full moon in the middle of the month. And all of this is the idea that the Jewish people always get back, we kind of get up after all the falls. We had very terrible times in our history when everything seemed hopeless. And then we would get up and we would arise again, and all of a sudden, just like the moon, even if you can't see it at all, in a day or two you'll be able to see it. So too, the Jewish people always rise back. Now, King David, was the 14th generation from Avram, so the gematria, the numerical value of the word David, is 14. And his dynasty was also similar to the moon, that the 14th day is when the moon can be seen almost the largest. And then on the 15th day of the month, of the lunar month, you could see full moon. And then by the end of the day, it starts decreasing, the part of the moon that we see. Of course, the moon itself doesn't decrease, but the part that we could see from the earth begins to decrease at the end of the 15th day. So the same way by Shlomo, King Solomon, at the end of his kingdom, things kind of went down. And then, of course, in another 15 generations, the temple was destroyed. And we're waiting for David's dynasty to come back, and that's the King Mashiach, the Messiah that we're waiting for, is descendant of David, who's going to renew the dynasty of King David. That's why when we bless the new moon, and by the way, the idea of blessing of the new moon will actually be in the cycle of Daf Yomi, what's called. There's a cycle that a lot of Orthodox Jews, and probably not only Orthodox Jews, but mostly Orthodox Jews, who learn the Talmud in 7.5 years or so by learning 1 page a day, one list of Talmud a day. It's called Daf Yomi. So it's a very popular cycle, and every 7.5 or so years, there is a great holiday made when the siyum, the finishing, is happening. A lot of people find out about it. And so those who follow Daf Yomi, right now, we're actually more than halfway through the cycle, and we're in a tractate called Sanhedrin. It talks about the main Beit Din, the main Jewish court, Supreme Court, Jewish Supreme Court. And among other things, that in this particular week, we're going to actually learn about the blessing of the new moon. The Talmud will talk about it. The blessing of the new moon, once a month when we see the new moon, we'll make a blessing on it called Kiddush Levana. Talmud doesn't call it Kiddush Levana, it's a later term, sanctification of new moon, literally. So in that Kiddush Levana, we mentioned David Melech Israel Chai V'Kayam. This idea of mentioning it, Rabbi Moshe Isserles, the main authority for Ashkenazic Jews, brings us in the name of Rabbeinu Bachya, a Sephardic rabbi who lived in the times of Rishonim, maybe 700 years ago or so, in Spain. So he explains that David's dynasty, of course, has to do with the moon, as I mentioned, and that's why we say whenever we see the new moon and bless it, we say David Melchizedek Havikayam, that David is always there. He's always potentially, we always wait for the descendant of David to come, the waiting of Mashiach. So that's the interesting thing about the Jewish calendar. And by the way, when the Jews were oppressed by various nations, one of the first things they used to forbid is keeping the Jewish calendar. They were very much against Rosh Chodesh, against the idea of sanctifying a new moon, and sometimes penalized by death penalty those who tried to do it, because they realized that the Jewish calendar is the main thing. Without the Jewish calendar, you can't have holidays, you can have many other laws. Many laws depend on the calendar, such as Shemitah, for instance, seventh year. You have to know when the year starts, when the year ends. The laws of 3 years, that the first fruits of any tree that's planted, we cannot eat those fruits and derive any enjoyment from them for 3 years. So again, you have to know how to count the years. For this, there's a special law about this holiday called Tu B'Shvat. We're going to have it soon, in less than 3 weeks, on a Thursday, 2.5 weeks from now. Tu B'Shvat, 15th of Shvat. The month of Shvat will start this Thursday, and Tu B'Shvat will be 2 weeks later. So the 15th of Shvat, again, we have to know when Shvat is and when the calendar is determined, in order to know all these laws and how to count the years of fruits. And many, many other laws depend on the year and on the month. And that's why the calendar is so crucial. Notice that even non-Orthodox Jews generally follow the same calendar. There used to be other sectarians who had all kinds of calendars, but all Jews today, practically all, the Karaim are a very small group today, but all the Jews today follow more or less the same calendar. Not more or less, they follow exactly the same calendar. I mean, the point is that those non-Orthodox Jews, let's say in America or in Israel, they still celebrate Yom Kippur on the same day. According to Karaite calendar, Yom Kippur can fall on a different day. But the point is that all Jews accepted the same calendar. Now, like I said, the calendar is fixed. It used to be that the witnesses would see the moon and their testimony would be accepted, and therefore the people didn't always know beforehand when the new moon will start. It depended on what people see. If there's a lot of clouds, for instance, the month could be extended for an extra day, because Jewish months are always either 30 days or 29 days, because the period of the moon is approximately 29 and a half days. So about half of the months are 29 days and half of the months are 30 days. They more or less follow the order of every other month. Not always. We just had recently 3 months in a row that were 30 days. So the calendar today is fixed, and it's more complex than that. But approximately half of the months are 29 days, and half of the months, slightly more than half, are 30 days, because the period of the moon is a little bit more than 29 and a half days. So that's why we used to have an uncertainty. People didn't know when the witnesses would see the moon, whether they will see it on the 30th day from the previous Rosh Chodesh, and that would become the new moon. Or if they don't see it, then the new moon would be the day later. So the previous month would be 30 days, and the first of the month would be a day later. So now it's all fixed, and until the times of Mashiach, basically, until the times of Messiah, we have everything. There are tables, special tables, based on which the calendar is made today. And like I said, practically all Jews today, not only Orthodox Jews, all Jewish people, Israelis, or everybody, follow the same calendar, the fixed calendar that was fixed more than 1,000 years ago. And on this, I'm going to end. If you like this video, please press like, and please subscribe to our channel.